everyone's going to fail. It's not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on your idea. It's just what happened. Again, if you're controlled by your ego, then you'll never get to 108 failures. You'll give up way sooner. Or to your point, you'll just get angry and try to force it to happen. And we all know what happens when you try to force something to happen. My best customer is always one that has been burned before. The number one fail point for any new idea is not fully understanding the unmet need of your user in the end.
Why is it important for innovation technology to know how many cups of coffee you had today? And why do grown companies, but also startups, fail on successfully turning ideas into value-generating innovations? Welcome to another episode of the Employee Experience Labs podcast from the Munich Podcast Studio. As you know, Employee Experience Labs podcasts are about HR tech, employee experience, shared services, and other interesting topics around HR in the workplace. We are currently running 2 different seasons at the same time because they intersect and influence each other. One session is around AI, and the other one is around the startup universe. Today, we will of course touch on AI, but we are mainly focusing on the startup universe. I had the honor to talk to Chris, an expert in business and experience innovation, who is currently leading the CEO co-innovation projects at Microsoft, but formerly being in many different roles in the startup and innovation universe, where he learned a lot about what it takes and where innovation goes wrong, and helps turning ideas into successful innovations. We talked about what capabilities are required and are often forgotten in the process. For example, how important such a simple thing as networking actually is. Listen to our conversation to learn more and what all of that has to do with how many cups of coffees you had today. Hi, Chris. It's good to see you. It has been a while, but I'm really happy to have you here today, to have you in my podcast. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you. No, I'm good. I'm flattered and honored, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
No, I'm pretty sure that I'm the one who is flattered here because we know each other for a while already, and I think what you have to share in the conversation today is really insightful, interesting for a lot of the listeners of the podcast. But let's go there. Chris, who are you? Who is Chris? What's your background?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. I'm Chris Massot. I'm currently with Microsoft as I run co-innovation essentially within Microsoft, and the way we define it on this team is like an executive co-innovation where we get executives together to talk with our company and our customers, our best customers, to talk about what a future together could look like, and then how can we create that future together. And the thing I like about what I do here is because I'm very customer focused and I'm very design focused, that we look at success through the lens of our customer.
And I can attribute to that totally.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I appreciate that. I mean, our idea is if you win, we win kind of thing, So I've been doing this for 3.5 years. Before that, I was in, innovation consulting for a long time, but more product development. And I was always fascinated by the entire product development process, from idea generation all the way through scale. So I spent most of my career running organizations or running companies in different parts of the process. So, what would happen is, like, for example, I was running an engineering product development firm, and we worked with a lot of very notable customers. And I noticed that our customers, despite the fact that they were enormous companies and very customer centric, didn't really know intimately about their users and their customers. And I was fascinated by social science and the ability to learn about our customers' behavior and how things can fit into their lives. And so I pivoted and then ran a social science firm for a while to kind of understand that and to learn how to better really, how to, as they say, how to design with a capital D,
Yeah.
And actually figure out unmet needs and how do we fill those. And the nice thing, and during that period, the company I was working with wasn't necessarily a technology company, even though 90% of what we did was technology because that's just the world we live in.
Yeah.
But it was good because we really focused on the problem. And in the way I look at things, that's how you have to approach it. You have to approach the problem for what it is. And then later you understand, is this a change management problem? Is it a technology problem? Is it an innovation problem? Is it a people problem? That sort of thing. And I really enjoyed that. So anyway, long answer to your question, but I guess the way that I describe myself is I'm in that intersection between technology and innovation and design and social science
and people
and people. And I'm not a practitioner, and I'm an engineer. I'm not a social scientist. I'm not a, I'm not a business analyst. But I've done all those things enough to where I can help like shepherd a customer or a colleague or whoever, kind of through the process. And it's fun. And that's where I get my energy. And as you notice from the work we did together, that's where I have fun, is how can we take something that doesn't exist today and turn it into something real, not science fiction. I'm not interested in, academia is important and it's great, but it's not where I want to go. I want to create things that are tangible and things that we can use together. Yeah.
Oh man, there's so much to unpick there. But yeah, this is how we know each other, right? We had our collaboration in the co-innovation space, and I really enjoyed this as well. But there's one thing that you shared that I think it's a big one. It's so obvious, but I also in my world see many people not going there, like identifying the problem and actually asking what the problem is, right? Many companies just assume that they know what the customer or client wants, right? It seems to be like there's a bit of I don't know, invisible barrier to actually ask. So like, hey, what's the problem? How can I help you? What can I help you solve? Right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great insight. And honestly, in my experience, even asking isn't enough. Oftentimes, you have to observe and you have to really understand. There's that famous thing where if you ask people how many cups of coffee they have per day, they will always say less than they actually have.
Interesting.
So if you say how many cups of coffee, like if you ask me how many cups of coffee, I'd probably say like 2, and I probably have 3 or 4. So
already, it's so early for you.
Yeah. Well, throughout the course of the day, not so far. So my experience, that's why you have to inquire, and you have to understand. When people say, "What's the problem?" What do they mean by that problem, and how is that problem affecting them, and what have they tried to do before, and who else is involved in the what other stakeholders are there? What is the system? Because everything operates in a system, and I've found that when you get to the core of it, the problem isn't what they thought the problem was. Those are problem indicators, I guess. The problem is actually something quite different, and then once you've discovered that, and the other thing is, it's also important to know who to ask. And I'm with a lot of customers that feel that they know the problem because they've asked their sales team, or they've asked leadership, or they've asked other things. In the people space, that's completely true, because if you ask leadership or managers, they'll give you a version of what employees are going through, but you have to actually immerse yourself in the life of the employee to truly understand how they're living their life.
Yeah, how they're perceiving things, exactly. Yeah. And this is truly another level, right? Not only asking but experiencing it. How have you helped companies with that exact problem? And was it easy for you to to relay this to your clients, that they know that they actually have that problem, that they don't know what the problem is?
Yeah. That is a great question. And that is oftentimes where the disconnect happens is, because oftentimes when people ask for something, are they really prepared for the answer?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they have a perception of what that answer is. And if they don't hear it, so it's important for us to set those expectations.
Yeah.
You have to trust the process. You have to be able to and provide evidence.
Yeah.
And I've oftentimes been with customers or been in conversations where you tell them something controversial. They were expecting something and they hear something else. But you have to back it up with evidence. And I'm not saying necessarily it has to be quantified evidence with tons of research, but just, even anecdotes.
Yeah.
It's like you think this is going well, but here are some sound bites from the people there and
from the ground. Yeah.
From the ground that maybe it's just something to explore. It may not be the answer. It may be, because something I do believe in is having a hypothesis, and oftentimes those initial assumptions are just that. It's a hypothesis. We think people are behaving this way because of this. We think they will buy this because of that. Yeah. And then you have to go, and then you go prove it. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes you turn it on its head and you realize that there's absolutely zero correlation between what they're doing and what and what you're saying. And you have to explore it further, And one other thing I'll say is, it's funny, the people that I work with who are easiest or best to collaborate this way are those who have tried it the other way and been burned.
Yeah.
They brought a product to the market and they realized they made an assumption that people would buy something and they didn't. And they had an assumption something would fit into their life this way and their behavior, because people are erratic. That's the thing when we talk. I mean, geez, Volker, we've talked for 5 minutes and we haven't talked about AI yet. That's the thing about.
We need to do that. Damn it!
Right.
How could I forget that?
Yeah. But that's the thing about AI, which is really fun and interesting, is that people behave erratically. Humans, that's how humans are, and that's how the universe behaves. So you have to test assumptions, and you have to test and then retest them and then retest them. And at least that's been my experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I fully agree. Do you know Stephen Bartlett?
Mm-hmm.
I've just finished his book, Diary of a CEO, and what he said is, he had also tried multiple companies, and he has also, sometimes won, sometimes failed. But what he says and what he learned, and I find this very interesting, he said, particularly founders, they have a million reasons why whatever their idea is will work. But they never ask the question, why will it not work? And right. I find this fascinating because this is I think the question you should ask yourself, right? This is opening your eyes and going away or taking away your rosé sunglasses that make everything pink and nice and shiny. It's like, okay, let's confront it with, why will I fail? Why will my idea not be successful? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, it's like they say, go for no, and if you can, because two things happen. One is the sooner you can find blockers, the better. So you may as well look for them, and to your point, if something's not going to work, you want to know. So go for no. The problem though, Volker, is you have to balance that with not becoming pessimistic, because as you know, the room is also full of people who say this won't work.
This won't work. Yes.
Yeah, and founders, innovators, anyone, they have to be able to separate themselves from, separate the institution from innovation and say, I understand that we may not think that can work, but let's explore it anyway, and let's understand that. So you have to be able to do both things, to be able to say, to challenge assumptions, but at the same time, continue making them and continue moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, from my perspective, what I would say is one of the most difficult things there is taking your own ego out of the way, right? Because you need to somehow have that self-confidence to say, like, my idea will work and we'll try it, but at the same time needing to take it out of the way so that this is not all that fuels your confidence that it will work.
Yeah. Well, I think in general, taking your ego out is just a good idea.
But very difficult. Very difficult. I still
very
fail, often.
Very difficult. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I don't know where you want to go with this conversation, but there's the whole idea of practicing detachment, and being able to be detached from the outcome, and to understand that everyone's going to fail. It's not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on your idea. It's just what happened, and if you can master that, which nobody does, but at least you can try, then you're able to fail and try again. I mean, there's all these famous stories, like, the one I always remember, I think it's Dyson, the folks that make the appliances.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know the exact number, but apparently before and maybe this is just an urban legend, but it's a great story. Before they did their first vacuum cleaner, they did like 108 that failed.
Wow.
But they kept trying.
Yeah.
And again, if you're controlled by your ego, then you'll never get to 108 failures. You'll give up way sooner, or to your point, you'll just get angry and try to force it to happen. And we all know what happens when you try to force something to happen, in a consumer world, and all that. So you have to be able to just accept the outcome and, learn from it and get better and get better and get better. And if you have that will and determination, you'll probably get there. Now, some ideas just aren't going to work, and that just happens.
Test and learn and fail fast. Yeah.
Fail fast. That's right. I mean, I think, and that's where, when you talk about innovating in the confines of a corporation versus a startup versus a small company, it's all very, very different.
Yeah.
And they try to create these environments in corporations that resemble startups, so you can fail fast, you can move quickly. But at the end of the day, they're still corporations with lots of money, right? And resources.
Yes.
And if someone decides we're going to keep trying, they'll keep trying. Startups kind of have that high risk, high reward where they can do things.
And you have none of that in the corporate environment, right? Because in the end, you are an employee. You have a contract. You have a fixed and some variable pay, but in the end, you have full security. So, and as you said, you have kind of not endless, but a big cash pot coming for you to continue to try and figure out. So there's no extrinsic motivation to do it the right way. And the question is, the intrinsic one, right? Many founders are just very intrinsically motivated. They work their butts off for years for an idea, right? And try to make it happen. And I'm not sure if you can actually build such a culture within a firm. Have you experienced with that? What's your view on that?
It's hard. I feel like at Microsoft we do a pretty good job at it, and other corporations I've heard similarly, where because at the end of the day, you're going to make your money how you make your money, and you have to be able to understand that, but then still innovate and still understand that you'll be working on things that may or may not prove to do. And once you get to a certain size, you'll work on a lot of things that will be successful and still won't be successful to the kind of scale that you need in your company. When you get to the size of a company like Microsoft, I mean, it has to be $1 billion idea for it to be interesting.
Yeah.
So, we have to work on a lot of $100 million ideas that to anybody else would be very, very interesting, and they're still interesting to us, but it's just a different scale,
Yes.
So Volker, the ones that I've seen in my consulting days that have been the most difficult, honestly, are the companies in the middle. Because Microsoft or whoever can say, we're gonna allocate a certain amount of of our revenue for innovation.
Yeah.
And you know, and 1% of a big number is a big number. So that's
Yes.
easy. It's easier, not easy, but
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah.
But when you work in a mid-sized company and it's a existential situation, it's much more difficult. And I've worked with a lot of smaller companies, like for example, a company that's a service provider that does, let's say they're a consultant, they do fee for service or whatever, and they want to become a product company. You know, they can say that they want to allocate time and resources to building the product and all that, but at the end of the day, they have to pay bills and they have to pay their employees, and they're going to go back to their core business of consulting when they need to do that, and what gets put on hold, but everything else, you know. So though that's again, just my experience, where I have seen the most difficulty, because it's really, really hard for them to maintain both when they understand that one pays the bills and one is where their future is potentially, but how do you reconcile the two? At a company this big, a bigger corporation, you can still reconcile that and say, we understand that we're going to make our money this way for the next probably 5 or 10 or however many years, but we can work on the future independently and outside of that, you know. And you've seen companies do everything from create separate entities or separate, you know, you're in a different building, you get people who look different and dress different. I mean, you know, they'll try to make themselves be very, very different to create this different environment, you know, so that, but they can at least, they have at least have more opportunity. But again, that's where I've seen the most struggle, is in that the smaller company that's really trying to pivot, but they just don't have the resources and to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes sense that the difficult is then, and when you think about those companies, if they don't get this pivot towards innovation, at some point their product will be obsolete and they have not, you know, the next one there. So sooner or later, if they don't do it the right way, they will anyway be obsolete and cannot pay their bills anymore. Difficult for something like this to happen to a company of the size of Microsoft, though.
I mean, yeah, we you know, probably have a little bit longer runway than most. Yeah, that's true. At the same time, though, Volker, and again, I'm not here to, you know, praise the history of the company I work for, but you know, Microsoft has had to change several times their direction and focus and where they're going, and I mean, again, there's a million stories of companies that have pivoted and successfully, and others that have not. And you know, and again, I didn't bring the number with me, but there's a high percentage of the Fortune 500 companies won't be in the Fortune 500 in 10 years or 20 years. You know, can you go through and pick out the ones that aren't? Probably not. I mean, maybe I can't. Somebody else maybe smarter than me can, but it'll happen. And
there might be a few ones that you can pick out to say, like, you know, these will be in the next 5 to 6 years still there, because they are very stable and you see the future of the products already. You know, I think NVIDIA, we are very safe on that one.
Probably.
But it's also the runway to there, and it's a good question. Now, let's not focus on Microsoft, but let's look a bit on your experience before, particularly in the startup universe. We have started to talk about this, but when you think about the startup universe, where did you see the biggest struggles that founders have? Where is that? And why I'm asking that, Chris, is also, you know, you hear the stories of the ones that are successful a million times, right? I try to be balanced. I didn't know the Dyson story. I didn't know that one, but you know, also similar to that one is also PayPal, right? PayPal has not been what it is now in the beginning. It was a very different product idea, and it has pivoted so many times to become what it is today. This is, I think, what many people just don't know, and I think it is therefore very interesting to understand, you know, what is it where founders, where ideas struggle? What's what you have learned?
So it's interesting. I almost see them as two different camps. There are startups that are highly capitalized.
Yeah.
And having lived in Seattle for a long time, there were a lot of startups that were formed by former Microsoft people that went off to do things. And then on the other side, there are startups that are not highly capitalized, that need funding and need to scratch and claw and find funding and all that. And I find that in my experience, the difference, like the failure points, are very different from those two.
Okay.
On the highly capitalized one, I mean, there's some commonality, but where I've seen on the highly capitalized ones, I've seen often where they have money, they have runway, so the sense of urgency may not necessarily be there, as it would be in a startup that needs to move quickly. And I've worked with at least more than two startups that were highly capitalized that basically spun themselves into failure by not understanding where good enough is. And they kept striving for perfection, and they kept changing direction because they were trying to follow the market. And a lot of it, is because they didn't truly understand the market. Maybe they didn't do the work up front to really understand what
What's
unmet
the problem
need
to solve.
Yep. What unmet need are we filling with this product? And let's then very aggressively go do that thing. So they would change, they would pivot. I literally one time, Volker had a company I was consulting with that delayed the launch of their product by a year because they decided to change the paint color on the product. So it was because the founder said it has to be whatever, So it's that. On the other side, on the less funded, the non-capitalized, which and frankly, I'll show my bias. I'm much more interested in those because they're the underdog. They're the one you want to see succeed. Everybody loves that story. And all that. Where I've seen them fail, and this isn't going to be a surprise, is just the fact that in order to have a successful startup, you have to have expertise across so many areas that it's almost impossible for a small group like that to cover everything. And even then, there's you don't know what you don't know. So most of the conversations I've had with startups is, where are their blind spots? What do they not see? What do they not understand? If they came from a large corporation and now they were in the startup, perhaps the way they sell is completely different. And do they understand that? And do they acknowledge that? Do they really understand supply chain if they're not supply chain people? If they're smart and maybe, one founder, let's say it's a tech company, and one founder is an engineer and one founder is in finance, and then someone else is more sales oriented, better. But they still have to go. But if they go manufacture something, or if they have to distribute, have they ever worked through a channel before? Do they even know what that means? It's really difficult. And being able to find those blind spots, and then even again back to the ones that you pull for. When you're really talking about like a citizen inventor, I mean they're not going to know those things. And here we are. We want to create this planet where anybody with a good idea can take it somewhere. They have to be armed with those resources, and you can't expect everyone to have had the experience or the education or whatever to do that. And frankly, Volker, that's always been the most fun I've had, is working with those people and helping them. What do they not know? What do they not see? I mean, I don't know a lot of this either. I don't see it either. So let's go find out together. What is the best way to approach this from, I love to work with hardware startups because they're constantly surprised with how difficult it is and how much it costs to build hardware. It's really, really hard. It's just hard. And I've talked to founders before who are like software biased, but they need a piece of hardware, and they're like, oh, we'll just go like build a cheap piece of hardware. And I'm like, yeah, you don't know how hard that is. You don't know how hard that is. You don't know that people spend millions of dollars and spend, many, many months and years developing what you just said you're going to do just on the side.
There's a reason why it's called hardware.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last thing I'll mention is then you kind of fall into that intellectual arrogance, which is if I'm really good at something, I can be really good at everything.
Mm.
And I've worked with a lot of startups where, and I'm not to pick on engineers, but let's just say that they're founded by an engineer, and the engineer says, "Well, I'm a really good engineer, so I can figure out finance. I can figure out how we should, run finance in the company, and maybe not, or they can say, well, I can project manage. I mean, I'm, I can do that,
Yeah.
and they don't maybe respect the fact that people spend a lot of years and a lot of time to get good at, project management or finance or sales or all these other disciplines.
I've heard there are even degrees for that.
There's degrees for that. There's experience. So you have to give proper respect to all those different pieces and not just assume that we'll figure that out later.
So when you have approached, when you have, come into those conversations and in touch with the underdog founder, how have you approached the situations and how have you helped them getting through that? Do you have an example how you helped them through and make them at least bringing them to product innovation number one, at least, like getting out of the I just have an idea, there is something.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, and just kind of there's very simple networking, and the one nice thing about I've been doing this for a while, is that I've worked with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Who and I also believe in the goodness of people, and people want to help, and the whole idea of paying things forward, and so that's number one is how can we create a community of people that want to help you, of people that can help you, and when you're dealing with newer founders, oftentimes that's where you can really help, is making those connections. I know someone who's been through that before. I think you should talk to them and they can help you. I know someone who does that for a living. Maybe they can help you in a way that you can fit into your construct of how you're running the company. That's one. That's a very, very simple one that people, I don't think, they just don't take advantage of. Is rely on the goodness and generosity of people, because I guarantee you at one point they were also helped along the way by someone.
Everyone. Yeah.
So ask. The second thing, this is a little bit more formulaic, is there are processes out there. In fact, I remember this is 10 years ago, but working with Intel, the chip company, on building.
I think everyone knows Intel.
I think everyone. Yeah. On building a framework to help founders identify and understand their gaps, and there's lots of frameworks out there that get into the different pieces of taking something to scale, and nowadays there's even some that are pretty kind of self-driven, but finding a framework, or building a framework, or working with someone to build a framework that's pertinent and relevant to what you're doing specifically, I think is also where we would typically start. And then again, understand the gaps, understand what they need to do. Not as simple as doing like a business model canvas, because that's a little bit more advanced. You have to, I think, already have certain things known to do that. But truly a framework of what it is you're trying to build and how you're going to build it, and do it in steps.
Yeah.
The first framework is how am I going to get this to a prototype? Or even a proof of concept. How am I going to get it to initial production? How am I going to get the cost out to get it to scale? I mean, they're all the little things that aren't so little. That and I think what happens, a lot of founders also start at the end. They think about, I'm going to scale this thing, and they don't realize that there's a lot of steps between now and then.
Idea to scale.
Yeah, that's right.
So basically, you're going in and make sure that you ask all the questions that they don't ask themselves, and help them find the right answers to those questions. It's amazing. When you think about doing this for an underdog founder, versus when you're doing this for someone who has an idea within a big company? Is there any difference that you see, or would you say like,
Yeah.
you know what, the framework, the approach is the same?
I mean, I think the general framework is the same. I think the opportunity is so much better at a large corporation because they do have the resources and they
Yeah.
have the scale. I mentioned earlier that, you know, my best customer is always one that has been burned before, unfortunately.
Yes.
You know, because they get it. They know what they
Yes.
need to do, you know, or they know that they need to pay serious attention. And often, and to me, I think the number one fail point for any new idea is not fully understanding the unmet need of your user in the end.
What are you
You
trying
know,
to actually solve?
which yeah,
And
which
does
trying to
it make
solve.
sense solving? Yeah.
Yeah, and corporations have so much opportunity to really do the right thing and to really understand how are we going to fit this into these people's lives that we're
Yeah.
talking about doing. You know, that they need to spend that time, and I feel like there's so much emphasis and so much momentum, and this is from everyone. It's from big corporations, it's from the big, you know, big consulting firms, the big system integrators, all these companies. They're all pushing towards like the big deal at the end, you know, and I think they shortcut through a lot of the really important initial steps. You know, I used to be part of an organization that sat in the that question of like, how do you balance like ethnography and like true like anthropological research with business, you know? Because on the one side, and this is again kind of where I would kind of benefit from sitting in the middle, because on the one side, I understand that a business can't afford to do like true anthropological research, and you can't go spend 5 years immersed in a culture in order to really understand how you're going to sell to that culture. You can do a part of that, but you can't do that. So you just have to understand that. And to all my anthropologist friends, I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. You know, on the business side, however, you have to acknowledge that you probably don't know as much as you think you know about your user, and you better go figure that out. You know, there's always these famous examples. I worked with a automotive company once that they were redesigning their minivan, and all of the user research they had done had evidence that the cargo net and kind of the cargo hold in the back of the minivan was something nobody used, and it took up space, and they had to build pieces around it, and it wasn't good. The senior VP of the organization said, "I'm sorry, we're using the cargo net. My wife uses it." So he based the entire design decision on his own experience. You know,
Okay.
And that's where, well, I mean, you know, you have the power and the resources to go find out what it is exactly we need within reason, but businesses, they want to get to the answer. You know, there's too much emphasis on quarterly results and getting to things. So again, I feel like big companies have an obligation, because they have the resources and they have the ability to go do those things. If anything, to lead by example, just to show the rest of the world that, you know, maybe if you're Henry Ford or Steve Jobs, you can figure out what it is people want, but the rest of us need to actually go do the work and do the research.
That's a good point. And you know, there's twice that you have to basically do this, right? On the first side, it is the founder, the one with the idea, to figure out, hey, what is the problem that I actually want to solve, and is this a problem that, you know, people are interested in solving? But you know, looking at it from the business lens, all of what I have learned then, and all of what I invest in my product as a founder, is worthless if I don't find a company that, you know, says like, you know what, or anyone else with, you know, with money, to say like, all right, I get it. I invest in you because I believe you are right? So how do you help a founder in getting funding for their ideas and making sure that not only he understands that there is a problem and I have the research and that's not just a hunch, but also someone who should invest is doing it.
Yeah. It's how do I answer that? So there's no shortage of people out there who will offer their advice.
Mhm.
and they're happy to take your money to help you productize something or
Yeah.
commercialize it and do all these things. I think the hardest part is, well, there's two. One is getting with the people,
Yeah.
the right investors, the right
Yes.
company.
Yes.
I mean, if you happen to live in Silicon Valley, maybe you can find the right people at the coffee shop. I mean, maybe you can get lucky like that. But
There
but
are
it's-
those anecdotes.
but there are those anecdotes. But I think you said early on, that's the one in a million.
Yeah.
The or at least one in 1,000. The most people have to go do the work and figure it out. So finding the person you can trust that will actually do what they say they're going to do. Because unfortunately, Volker, as much as I say that I believe in the goodness of people, I also believe that people have a business to run, like you said. And, venture capitalists, people who do things. I mean, it's a numbers game. If they can bring in 10 startups and one succeeds, they're good, and that's fine. We all understand that. So this isn't, it's not deception. It's reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you be that one? How do you not be one of the 9? How do you find the one that's going to put the right emphasis on you? How do you find the right consultant that's going to have the time and the space to focus on you? Because they probably have other customers that they're focusing on, and when one customer gets momentum, that's where they're going to go focus, that sort of thing. So I think building that kind of trusted network, back to that again, is a big piece, and then everything else is just hard work, I mean, whether you're a startup in a certain niche and you have to go to product shows and meet people and understand, and like I said, talk to others. How did you do it? How did you make it work? It's just a lot of hard work. I mean, I've known, I have a friend who is a founder, kind of founder CEO type, and super great guy, super smart, somewhat actually quite introverted. So, going on the road and having to pitch his idea to 100 different people, and all of them are going to say no, is really, really, really hard. Or they're going to tell you what you want to hear, but then it doesn't go anywhere. So it was really, and he told me that was the hardest part, was like, having to, he has a family, he's an introvert, and he said he would just be so exhausted because he'd have to be on all the time, and he would have to travel, and and if you're going to be successful, you have to travel to them. They're not going to come to you, right? So you have to go and you have to just talk, and you have to talk. And again, you might have to pitch to 100 people before with a damn good idea, right? Before you get the right one that's the right fit, or you have to be able to discern between the ones who have passive interest, because again, these things that are never successful because of passive activity. Someone, you have to be very active and very, your investor has to have as much energy behind it as you do in order for you to be successful, and then, in Volker, there's all these stories about they had an idea and then they sold it to the big corporation for all this money, and that's great. And again, it's a great story, but that doesn't tell you all of the work that went behind it.
No.
There's an expression in show business that says, the actor or whoever, the entertainer, worked really, really hard for 20 years to become an overnight success, and that's where people, they don't see that hard work that led up to it. And even with the hard work, there are probably connections and good fortune that happened along the way. But I guess so. That's the, and the idea here is not to scare people, is not to say, oh, don't even try because it's so hard. It's just know what you're getting into and understand that, what is it? again, I'll get the numbers wrong, but 90% of startups never make money. And then, 90% of the startups that do make money never actually make profit. They just make enough to survive, So it's a hard business,
It is, yeah. And not many see that. And I think therefore, Chris, I think, and I hope it is actually doing the opposite. It's encouraging people because, they know they're not alone if they are not yet making money, or they're not alone if they are, failing with the first idea, right? And I think this is an important message to say, out of 1,000, maybe one makes it, or the calculation you did with venture capitalists, right? They engage with 10 companies that have a same or very similar direction or product or service, and if one out of that makes it, they are fine. Which also means the other 9 won't, and they will be very quickly like, okay, thank you. That's it, right? And keeping this in mind, that you're not alone if you are not successful in the beginning, is important. Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, and I can talk about this now because I've been working for a long time, is what are you suited for as an individual, the founder or the individual? And because people will ask me, because I've had the good fortune of working for startups, I've owned my own company, I've worked for large corporations, I've worked for a lot of mid-sized corporations, and they've asked me what do I prefer, and the first thing I say is, well, first of all, I'm very fortunate to have tried them all, because I don't think you know which one you prefer until you try them. And I think everyone should try different things, and I know a lot of people that come out of college and they go immediately work for a large corporation. That's great, but perhaps they would benefit from working for a small company or doing their own thing to learn. If I didn't, like, for example, when I ran my own company, I had to manage a P&L. And I'd managed a P&L in like in a corporate environment before, but it's not the same.
No.
That's managing a P&L of your own thing. I was much smarter at managing a P&L at a corporate level after that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think everyone needs to do that. But the other thing is, you change over time. When I was younger, I was happier to take more risk. I was, happier. The energy that I wanted from work was different. So, working for a startup or working in that environment was fine. Now it's not for me anymore. It's not. That's just me. Somebody else with a completely different experience. But I think that's the other part, is like, are you really at that time in your life, in your existence, to do this? Like you said, it's really, really hard. It can be super satisfying. Volker, I know a ton of people who did startups that were unsuccessful, and it was still a great experience for them because of what they learned and what they did and the connections they made and the people they met, and maybe they sold a few products and they actually helped people. They actually helped people, and there's pride in that. So don't look at Nest and say, I got to be that to be successful. There's a lot of different variations of success. I know a lot of people that created apps that you'll never hear about. Their number 700 million on the Apple Store, but good for them. It is very, very, very cool. Again, you got to go in knowing what's possible, and if you went in expecting to be the next number one in the App Store, then maybe you'll be disappointed. But there's still, like, to your point, I would still encourage people to try, understand what you're getting into, and understand that there's stress and pressure and all of that. But it can also be really fun, and you can also learn a ton.
And Chris, correct me if I get it wrong, but I think when I would ask you, what is the one thing that you would recommend as the first thing to a founder, is build a network, create your network, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I have to ask you one question, right? In the startup universe, there is this nice expression, fake it until you make it. I'm pretty sure you've heard about that.
Pretty sure.
You, with your experience, what would you say? How much of that is true versus what is just, people say that?
I mean, I think fake it till you make it exists everywhere.
Mm.
You know, a new job, a new business, a new initiative. I
Yeah.
mean, everything. You know, and I think it's one of those things that has two sides to it. You know, it's like when you say that someone is interesting. Are they interesting because it's cool? Or are they interesting because they're weird? Right? I mean, so you know, it's like there's
Yeah.
these things have two sides.
Yeah.
On the one side, I think that you got to have confidence,
Yeah.
and you got to believe in yourself, and sometimes you have to make assumptions,
Yeah.
and sometimes I didn't say this, but sometimes you have to make it sound as if those assumptions are real.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
in order to get consensus, to get momentum, to get stuff happening, and you know, you will never an idea will never get off the ground if you're ultra conservative and if every
Yeah.
sign of of trouble you
Yeah.
stop, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that part is true. On the other hand, I also think that fake it till you make it can be um, there, um, there's a dark side to it,
Mm.
a shadow side to it,
Mm. Mhm.
which is lying and deceiving and that's not cool, you know. And I would never. I mean, unfortunately, people have done that and been successful, and that's just
Yeah.
the way the world is. But I wouldn't. I don't want any part of that. You know,
There must be
And-
some substance behind it, and if there's no substance, then it's not real. Yeah.
look, if you're saying that we believe this is true,
Yeah.
and we believe it's true so wholeheartedly that we can be really convincing,
Yeah.
then then go for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you know something is not true, but you're just lying because you're trying to convince an investor or you're trying to convince your employees to hang with you, or you're trying to convince someone to give you money, then I'm not going to pull for you anymore.
Mm.
And that's something I have had to do a lot of consulting on in the past is what message should we give
Mm.
that doesn't turn people away because we've overemphasized
Yeah.
the risk, but at the same time we don't want to mislead people.
Yeah.
How do you thread that needle? And that's something else, I guess, Volker, that I would say is very important, is just communicate very carefully if you're a startup.
Mhm.
Words matter.
Yeah.
Things can turn people off or turn people on deceptively, in ways that you may not recognize. So words matter. And the one thing you don't want to know as a founder is to have a reputation as somebody who has, sold people a bill of goods before.
Mhm.
That's not something you want to follow you. So no, I think I think the spirit of fake it till you make it is great. And I'll say one last thing, and I've been talking for a while, but I'll say one last thing about this is it also depends on who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And I've always had a belief, and I've always advised folks, whatever it is you're good at, trust yourself to do that.
Mhm.
And if I know that I'm very conservative and I'm very conscientious and I'm very considerate, then I'm probably not going to, overtly lie in a way that would cause harm. So trust yourself to be considerate.
Mhm.
If you're a storyteller, trust yourself to tell a great story, but then temper that with, well, am I telling us what story am I telling?
Is it a story
So-
or a fairy tale?
Exactly. So understand who you are and trust yourself, and focus on the things you're not, which
That's
we all
great.
have that.
Great advice. Thank you, Chris. Now,
Yeah.
we have spoken already too long without the word AI. I'm sorry, we have to bring it in. So, when you think about the world we are in, there's no way you can go around AI.
Hmm.
And of course, there are and will be even more AI startups out there. But when you think about the wider startup cosmos, do you think AI will influence how founding will work, how a startup ecosystem will work, or is it just just another tool set that someone will use?
This is just my opinion. I'm not, I mean, I think we don't know yet necessarily. I think that the truth is somewhere. Okay, so they say that when the word processor was invented, then the world was flooded with novels and books because now people had a much easier way to produce content. AI is going to do a lot of that. It's going to produce a lot of content, whether it's marketing content or the more straightforward ones like coding and marketing and these things that are fairly straightforward. But it'll trickle down to everywhere. And as the one thing that is true about AI is, unlike almost every other technology that I've been involved with in my life, it's truly everywhere, and it is truly, you can theoretically apply it to anything.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is going to shake itself out in the coming years. The thing that I think people don't recognize. Well, first of all, I'm a big believer that two things can be true at the same time. And it is true that because of AI and because of where technology is, things move much faster and results are much quicker than ever.
Yeah.
So just true, right?
Yeah.
And AI just propagates that. At the same time, we're still really early. I don't think people understand that we don't. There's so much left to do when it comes to, which I think is great because that's an opportunity, right? It's not a scary thing. It's a good thing, And we want to make sure that everyone accounts for responsible AI and for and for, again, causing no harm. But we're still really early. So I don't know. I mean, at some point, AI will allow people to focus on what's important, and that'll apply to founders as well.
Yeah.
And whether AI helps them with their research or with coding or with
bookkeeping.
Content, that's right. Bookkeeping. Yeah. It'll help. And, and I think, again, when we talk about networking and kind of creating your ecosystem of partners, it'll really help there as well, but to what extent? I mean, are we going to have AI created startups that never actually had a human at the front end of it? I mean, that sounds like science fiction, but who knows?
Who knows?
The truth is somewhere in between, right?
Yeah. Chris, thank you so much. I had a really, really insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Thank you.
Of course. No, this was great. I mean, I love these conversations. I mean, Volker, the reason we talked about doing this in the first place was because we would just spontaneously have these conversations.
Yes.
So this.
And we could also just record it.
May as well record it and see if anybody else cares.
Yes.
But I think no, I love. I mean, if I could do this all day, aside from getting exhausted after a while of just talking, but it's super fun. So thank you again for inviting me and for asking me to do this, it was wonderful. And I think your podcast is great. I think this whole thing is very good, and I think you yourself are a great example to those out there about starting something, doing the work,
Thank you, Chris.
Doing it right. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.